I've said this before. I said, we don't have a friendship. We have a funship. And on a friendship, you call somebody up and you say, hey, you looked a little down. Can I do anything? Can I come over? On a funship, you say, you seem a little down. Call me when you're up.
Picture this. A man who made the whole world laugh, sitting quietly in a room, staring at a piece of art worth over $1 million, knowing that somewhere across the world, a family was claiming it was stolen. Not stolen from a gallery. Not stolen in some back alley deal. Stolen during one of the darkest moments in human history. And that man was Steve Martin. The wild and crazy guy. The comedy legend. The man with the white hair and the easy smile who seemed like he had never done a single thing wrong in his entire life. But this wasn't a punchline. This wasn't a bit. This was real, and it was about to get so much more complicated than anyone expected. There's a moment in every celebrity's life when the world they carefully built starts to show cracks. For Steve Martin, that moment came not from a scandal on set, not from a tabloid affair, not from some Hollywood meltdown caught on camera. It came from a painting. And what happened next changed everything. To understand how deep this goes, you have to understand who Steve Martin really is underneath all of it. Because the man the world knew, the rubber-faced comedian, the SNL icon, the guy who did physical comedy like nobody before or since, that was only part of the story. Steve Martin was born in Waco, Texas, and his childhood was anything but warm. His father was cold, emotionally distant. A man who, by Steve's own account, never once looked his son in the eye and said he was proud of him. That kind of silence leaves a mark. And Steve Martin carried that mark with him, right into one of the most extraordinary careers in American entertainment history. He worked at Disneyland as a kid, selling guidebooks, doing magic tricks, studying how people react, what makes them laugh, what catches their attention. He went on to study philosophy at university. He read constantly. He thought deeply about everything. While the world was watching the pratfalls and the sight gags, the man behind all of it was quietly becoming one of the most intellectually serious people in Hollywood. By the late 1970s, Steve Martin wasn't just famous. He was a phenomenon. His comedy albums went platinum. His HBO specials were events. Saturday Night Live became a completely different show on the nights he hosted. He was filling arenas, not concert halls, not theaters, arenas. With tens of thousands of people who came just to watch a stand-up comedian. That had never been done before. Not like that. Then came the movies. The Jerk. Roxanne. Planes, Trains and Automobiles. L.A. Story. Father of the Bride. One after another after another. But quietly, running parallel to all of that fame, Steve Martin was building something else entirely. He had become a serious art collector. Not the kind of celebrity who buys expensive things to fill empty walls and impress guests. A real collector. He studied artists the way other people study scripture. He built relationships with gallery owners, attended international exhibitions, understood the history behind every piece he acquired. He amassed one of the most respected private art collections in America. And that passion, that genuine, intellectual love of art, is exactly what made him vulnerable. Because no one ever tells you that loving something deeply can also be the thing that brings you down. The painting arrived in Steve Martin's collection in 1995. He purchased it from a respected art dealer for a reported $1.2 million. The piece was called Portrait of a Man, attributed to Frans Hals, a Dutch Golden Age master from the 1600s. One of the great artists of European history. Martin was proud of this one. It was exactly the kind of acquisition that defined his collection. Serious, historical, significant. He had documentation. He had provenance records. He paid full price through proper channels. He had absolutely no reason to believe anything was wrong. But deep inside the private archives of a German family, a different story had been waiting for decades to be told. The Steenen family had owned that painting once. Long before it ever reached any gallery. Long before it passed through any dealer's hands. The year was 1938. Nazi Germany was tightening its grip on everything. Jewish families across Europe were being systematically stripped of their homes, their businesses, their savings, their art. The Steenens lost this painting during that period. Whether it was physically seized, sold under extreme duress, or outright stolen, the historical record was murky. But one thing was never in doubt. The family considered it theirs. And for over 50 years, they had been trying to find it. When they finally traced it to Steve Martin in the late 1990s, everything shifted. Suddenly, one of the most beloved names in Hollywood was entangled in something tied directly to one of history's most horrific chapters. And that's when things started to get complicated in ways that nobody had anticipated. Here's what most people never knew about the Nazi art theft problem. It didn't end in 1945. When the war was over, stolen artwork didn't magically return to the families it was taken from. Instead, it flooded the international market. Pieces moved through auction houses, private sales, estate liquidations, and galleries across Europe and America. They passed through so many hands over so many decades that by the time they reached collectors in the 1980s and 90s, they had clean paperwork. Legitimate histories. No visible sign of what had really happened to them. Steve Martin was not alone. Not even close. Hundreds of major collectors had found themselves holding artwork with hidden wartime pasts they knew nothing about. Major museums. Respected institutions. People who had done everything right by every standard available to them at the time. But none of that stopped the headlines. The Steenen family filed a formal restitution claim. The legal process began to move. And Steve Martin's name was now attached to a case involving Nazi theft, international art law, and questions of moral responsibility that no lawyer could easily answer. Those close to Martin said privately that he was deeply troubled by all of it. This was not a man who wanted to own something built on someone else's suffering. His love of art was too real for that. Too personal. The idea that one of his most treasured acquisitions might carry this kind of history inside it, that hit him hard. But the public wasn't hearing any of that. All the public saw was the headline. Steve Martin. Stolen painting. Nazi Germany. 3 phrases. That's all it took. And the story exploded. No one was ready for what he did next. As the restitution claim moved forward, something happened that stopped the entire art world in its tracks. Steve Martin didn't fight it. Let that sink in for a second. Other collectors had fought cases like this for years. Decades, sometimes. Dragging families through court after court, spending millions on legal teams, exploiting every procedural delay available just to hold on to what they had legally purchased. Institutions with entire legal departments and enormous public reputations had done exactly that. Steve Martin took a different path entirely. He agreed to return the painting. No courtroom drama. No counterfiling. No public relations machine running interference. No statements designed to protect his image while quietly undermining the claim. He simply said yes. The Steenen family, who had been searching for this piece for over 50 years, got it back. And the decision came directly from Steve Martin himself. People who were close to him at the time said it was never even a debate in his mind. The moment the provenance research was clear. The moment the history of that painting was confirmed, there was no real choice to make. But nobody expected this. Not from someone who had paid over $1 million for the piece. Not from someone who had every legal right to fight back and the resources to do it indefinitely. And the reaction from the art world was something nobody saw coming either. The art world had been watching. What Steve Martin had done was so rare that people genuinely didn't know how to process it at first. The Getty Museum had fought restitution battles. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been entangled in them. Billionaire collectors across Europe and America had delayed, deflected, and litigated for years over pieces with far less clear-cut histories than this one. And here was a Hollywood comedian, a man most people associated with a fake arrow through his head and pratfalls on stage, who had just quietly done what powerful institutions refused to do. Art restitution lawyers spoke publicly about it. Holocaust heritage organizations acknowledged it. It set a standard. It sent a message that, when stripped of ego and money and pride, the question of what to do in situations like this was never really that complicated at all. But here's the part that gets you. Martin later talked about what the experience meant to him. And what he said wasn't what people expected. He didn't sound bitter. He didn't sound victimized. He didn't frame it as something that had been done to him. He sat with what had happened. He understood it. He reflected on the fact that behind every great piece of art, there is a human story. A family. A history. A life. And sometimes that story demands more than admiration. Sometimes it demands you to be accountable, even when it costs you something real. The real twist in this entire scandal? The man whose name had been dragged into it came out the other side looking better than when he went in. No one expected that either. The Steenan family got their painting back. A piece of their history, taken more than 60 years before, finally returned to where it belonged. Steve Martin kept collecting art, more carefully, more thoughtfully, with a deeper sense of what it really means to own something that carries history inside it. He kept creating. He kept performing. He went on to build some of the most beloved work of his later career, including Only Murders in the Building, a show that introduced him to a whole new generation who had no idea about any of this. And the art world? It changed too. Slowly, but measurably. The conversation about collector responsibility, about Holocaust-era restitution, about what the right thing to do actually looks like, that conversation grew. And this case was part of why. Steve Martin walked into one of the ugliest corners of history completely by accident. And when the moment came to decide what kind of man he was going to be, he surprised everyone. Including, maybe, himself. So here's the question I want to leave with you. Steve Martin paid over $1 million for that painting in good faith. He had documentation, provenance, everything. And he gave it back anyway, without a fight, without a court battle, without asking for anything in return. Do you think that was the right call? Or do you think he should have pushed back, given that he did everything by the book? Garo.